The remainder of this evening, then, now that we've talked about this rationalist option, we shifted for a moment from theologians, those who talk about theology and religion, to philosophers. Okay, we've talked enough about philosophers for tonight. We'll come back to them in 2 weeks when we have our course in modern philosophy. In the meantime, let's go back to religion. So have we ever heard of the Quakers? Have you heard of the Quakers, the Friends? That's part of this next chapter. We're up to a chapter called the Spiritualist Option. So before, the previous chapter was called the Rationalist Option. There were certain people who decided to flee into the head and into the mind and try to figure this out through reason. Other people left behind all of that and said, okay, let's just focus on other things like the heart and spirit. So the Spiritualist Option, it was simply the case that intolerance and debates about dogma led people to look for a more spiritual religion. Is this Catholic religion, for instance, with all its hierarchy, really what Jesus intended? Or do we need to look for something less structured, less material, and more spiritual? So this is called the Spiritualist Option. Jacob Boehme, in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, he died in 1624. It's the story of a wandering cobbler who saw enough about different churches and their different beliefs and their debates, and how it was that he likened the situation to the Tower of Babel. Do you remember the Tower of Babel in the book of Genesis? After the Tower of Babel fell, people spoke different languages, and he's sort of looking at the situation. Not only in Europe are we speaking different languages, but when it comes to religion, we're speaking different languages, people. And no one's understanding the next person. Jacob began having visions. He wrote down the visions, and as part of that, he said that God dictated to him these visions word for word. Ooh, yikes. What do? Going back to the example of Cynthia, I hope you don't mind me picking on you here with the vision you had last night. But when Cynthia says, God told me last night to write down my vision of the Blessed Virgin Mary and to share with you all this evening, and Father Jamie's trying to shut me down. So Jacob had visions, said that God told him to write them down word for word. What was interesting about this was that Jacob was essentially exalting the freedom of the spirit, the inner life, individual revelation. As Catholics, we're very cautious about individual revelation. As Catholics, we typically don't use the word I, right? As Catholics, how do we pray? We pray saying we. And so when it comes to revelation, the church is very hesitant to approve any revelations. Have you ever noticed that? There are very few revelations, for instance, of Mary, that the church approves. And every time someone says that they're seeing Mary, the church gets nervous. But Jacob had this idea that the same Holy Spirit who inspired the Bible way back when is still inspiring people today to write down modern-day scriptures, if you will. The story of another person. So we see that Jacob died in 1624. Now we get to the story of George, who was born in 1624, another cobbler. How interesting. He was a cobbler's apprentice. He looked around and saw the way his friends were living. Oh, how disgusting, the way my friends were living so promiscuously and all. He came to the belief that all English churches were wrong and that their worship was an abomination to God. Look at the Anglicans. Look at the Lutherans. Look at the Catholics. Look at whomever. The way that they are worshiping God, God would be disgusted to look down and to see what they're doing. God would be offended by some of the things that they are saying that they're doing in the name of God. So George Fox was his name. He started spreading some radical ideas. Churches pride themselves on their beautiful churches, right? And their beautiful altars with all their saints and the gold and everything that's in those churches. He said, God doesn't dwell in churches, people. God does not live in a church. There's nothing more holy about a church than there is about a house. His view of churches was that churches are houses with belfries, with bell towers. Ooh. God doesn't live in a house. And a church is just a house with a bell tower. He also said, pastors who work for salary are not real priests, but are journeymen. Remember, journeyman is a word that we often hear in relation to electricians and plumbers, right? They do what they do for pay. If you have a priest and he's being paid, he's no different from that electrician or that plumber, that journeyman. Ooh. He also said, those things that you hear when you go to Holy Family, let me just tell you how they distract from the Spirit. Things like songs and an order of worship, the way that you all go so systematically as Catholics, sermons, sacraments, creeds, ministers, all of those things distract from the Spirit and the freedom of the Spirit. If the Spirit's going to talk, it's not going to be through all those things. He said instead that an inner light shines within every person. All of this thinking now. Right? For years we were taught that the truth comes from God to the Pope and trickles down through that hierarchy to us. No, he's saying that light is inside every person. There's an inner light inside every person. You need to listen to that inner light even before you listen to other people and what it is that they say about God and about religion. Listen to that inner light. And so he would go to his Baptist friends at their Baptist meetings, at their Baptist churches, and start sharing this spiritual vision that he had of Christianity, less focused on things like buildings and hierarchies and outer vestments and all sorts of things. And they would deride him and beat him and stone him. He was not treated well. But his followers grew rapidly. They called themselves the children of light. Why? Because everyone has an inner light, right? The children of the light. And Fox preferred to call them friends. And others who saw how it was that they got so fervent about their religion that they actually started to tremble sometimes, started to call them what? Quakers. Right? And so if you've heard of the Quakers, those people who quake in their shoes, who tremble, who shake because they get so excited about their religion. The children of the light, the friends, all of that was a movement that started with George Fox and this idea of the inner light. So when they go to church, do they have songs and ministers dressing up and an order of worship and sermons and sacraments? No. They go and they sit together in silence unless someone is inspired by the Spirit to speak. And they just sit there. And they sit there unless someone is inspired to speak. And George Fox, many times, he would just sit there himself and people would look at him because he's the leader of all this. And you know what? The Spirit wasn't inspiring. And so a lot of what the Quakers, the friends, the children of light did was they just sat and waited for the Spirit to inspire them. And if the Spirit inspires you, then speak up. But in order to create, we got to be cautious because we don't want to fall into this individualism. Where, man, Terry is talking all the time now when we're sitting in silence. Okay, how are we going to do that? It's all of us discerning together as a community, being a loving community. So it's not about private individuals, it's about us as a community. Quakers are known, there's the joke that's told about the Quakers. Really, it's not a joke, it's really an observation of who the Quakers are. Of a person who went to a Quaker meeting for the first time, and they sat there, and they sat there, and they sat there, and they asked them, when's the service? Because they're just sitting there. And the person replied, when our gathering is over, the service begins. Ooh, think about that for a moment. When's the service? Meaning like, when's the church service? When's the service? No. When we're done here, then the service begins. Outside of here, we start serving other people. Ooh, that's deep.
You know that group named La Luz del Mundo? You know, they have churches here.
Try another.
There's one over there on Second or Third Street.
Right.
They built the same churches. They all look alike. There's one over there in Luling, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's called La Luz del Mundo. And I was wondering whether they were the same as Quakers, but
Not that I'm
you
aware
come
of.
from Mexico and you have to go a pilgrimage to Monterrey every other year or something like that. But they call themselves La Luz del Mundo, which is the children of the light.
Oh, no.
But it's more Mexican.
There we go. So the Quakers have this idea of this inner light. Before you listen to all these other outer voices about religion and everything, people, listen to that voice inside your own heart. And if the Spirit stirs within you to share something, then share it with us. So not going to have any sacraments, not going to have any songs, not going to do anything except coming together and listening to see if the Spirit speaks to us today. And we're all about community, so all the decisions that we make are going to be about consensus. And if there's not consensus, then we're going to go away today and come back the next time and continue listening to the Spirit.
It's black and gold.
The Quakers were different because they refused to pay tithes, they refused to take oaths, they refused to uncover their heads when around government officials. Excuse me, right? They refused to use tithe. They used, so in Old English, the more informal was to say thou. Hallowed be thy name, all that was informal. We talk to God more informally. For us, in the 21st century, it sounds more formal. Instead of using the informal thou, they would use the informal thou rather than the more formal address in England, which was you. So when they did refer to people like government officials, they didn't use the more formal you. How are you? They were using the less formal thou. Art thou? Oh, this was an insult. They were upsetting the system. So Fox traveled throughout England and then to Scotland, to the Caribbean, to North America, had tens of thousands of followers. Perhaps the most famous follower is William Penn. Have we heard of William Penn before? We've heard of Pennsylvania, right? William Penn founded this colony of complete religious freedom in what today is Pennsylvania, built on Quaker ideas. At that time, all the other colonies were religiously intolerant. There was only one tolerant colony, and that was Rhode Island. And so Fox received a land grant from Charles II, and he believed that that land still believed in the native people. So even though you gave me a grant for that land, I'm going to pay the native peoples for that land. We're going to live in peace with these people, and we're going to have this holy experiment in a place that would later come to be called Pennsylvania. What was the capital city called? The city of brotherly love in Greek, Philadelphia. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the capital of Pennsylvania. Philadelphia, the city of fraternal love, comes from that experiment of William Penn. All of it tied to religion.
I worked for the University of Pennsylvania and we were the Fighting Quakers.
The Fighting Quakers is the mascot. What an ironic name.
Yeah.
And it was William Penn's religious tolerance that was eventually embedded in the U.S. Constitution. Can't we all just get along? So you're Catholic and you're Lutheran and you're Reformed and you're Methodist and you're Baptist and whatever. Can't we all just get along? Religious tolerance from William Penn to the U.S. Constitution. One last voice is Emanuel Swedenborg. So Swedenborg then was a Swedish aristocrat who traveled widely and then began having visions. God, I love it. When God gives the gift of visions to a person, that's often a curse, you know? He didn't feel called to found a church, but all of his followers, about 12 years after his death, came together and formed a church, the Church of the New Jerusalem.